square window.
You're listening to Through the Square Window with me, Samira Ahmed.
Me, Graham Kibble-White.
And me, Joy Whitby.
Hello. And welcome to this special episode recorded at the home of Joy Whitby in West London. Joy is a producer, writer and author who's had a long career in broadcasting stretching back to the 1950s. She's probably best known for revamping the BBC's children's programming in the early 1960s, creating, amongst other things, the preschool children's show Play School and the storytelling series Jackanory.
Towards the end of the decade, Joy moved to London Weekend Television, where she produced Catweazle, among many others, and in 1970 founded her own production company, Grasshopper Productions. Then, as head of children's programmes at Yorkshire Television, she brought us The Book Tower, Passport to Treasure, Under the Same Sky, and many more.
Joy, thank you so much for allowing us into your home. And I've got to also say that I did come to you and ask for your blessing about calling our podcast Through the Square Window, which obviously comes from Play School.
Yes, there were two other windows. I wondered why you chose the square one.
Well, it's the same shape as television, and the arch window might have suggested an ecclesiastical kind of podcast.
Yes, that's true. The point about those windows were they were supposed to be associated with content in the programme, so that if you were doing a programme about balloons, you'd use the round window.
See. So when would you use the arch window? Got to ask.
I suppose we must have done something about a church.
I once did an online poll to see what was the favourite window. What do you think came out on top?
The round one?
No, the arch. Everyone likes the arch. I don't know why.
It's the most interesting window, isn't it, really? Visually.
We'll talk in more detail about Play School shortly, but I want to take you back to the beginning, because when we spoke to Graham Garden recently, I asked him about his first memories of television, and he did watch whirligig and early children's TV programming in the 50s. When did you, just as a sort of a person, remember first watching television? Was it ever a part of your growing up? I mean, you were born in the 1930s, so there was no television service then, of course.
No, my parents got a television set, I think, after I'd left home.
So when did you first encounter it, just without being in the profession, I mean, if at all?
I think I must have been married already. That was in 1954 I got married. So I think around that time I would have been beginning to watch. Indeed, I did watch a lot of television through my early marriage.
Can you talk to us then about your route into the BBC? You began in BBC Radio, didn't you?
Yes, as a studio manager. There was an intake every year of graduates, and I was one of them. And I went straight into the central department, which was very interesting because you did all sorts of things, including drama, which was my very favourite, excepting there were some painful memories.
Why painful memories?
Well, I can remember having to be a studio manager, which meant you made spot effects and sound effects. And there was a drama about a terrible prison camp. And my job was to whip people with a whip, and to stand in front of a huge cast and whip was not something I could do, and they let a man take over.
Yeah, I know, you found it distressing, didn't you? And I don't blame you.
Not afterwards. I've now lived through it, but at the time it wasn't much fun.
Gosh.
So how did you come to make the move into television?
Anyone with any kind of ambition or interest in moving on tended to look at the notice board, which always had opportunities for people to transfer. I was working for a wonderful woman called Jean Sutcliffe, who really taught me all I knew, I think, about small children.
So she ran the children's department?
She started Listen with Mother. On which I worked in radio. And she was so against television that she really put anyone off. The thought of going to television was very vulgar, she thought. But then she happened to see, I don't know where she saw it, but she saw a drama with Edith Evans, and she came back glowing and said, "You could see the pulse in her neck." throbbing. It was something we can't do in radio.
So she was converted.
And she was converted.
So you worked on children's radio storytelling and music programmes from 1956 to 1962. Tell me a bit more about that move to television, because 1962 is around the time that Television Centre has opened, isn't it? So it's a whole new world has opened up.
Yes. I was always astonished. I remember signing a paper early on which said that I would not leave for 5 years, I think it was. And I couldn't believe that anyone thought I'd want to leave in 10 years, let alone 5. It seemed inconceivable that people once in that wonderful world would ever want to leave it.
And I remember you said you were commissioned to write a report about... Was it about children's television?
I was in radio, schools radio, and got an attachment to what was then the first year, I think, of Blue Peter. Which was run by someone called John Hunter Blair, who devised it and who had a much more flexible programme, so that I was allowed to do 3 little plays within Blue Peter.
Oh, lovely.
And that's where some of the people I later worked with, I first got to know. And during that time, the head of children's then was a rather splendid man called Owen Reid. And Owen asked me to do a report on Watch with Mother. It was after Muffin the Mule that Watch with Mother became the programme for small children.
And that was the one that was that where Andy Pandy would go, or Bill and Ben? They were little animated.
Yes, there were
puppetry.
5, a different programme each day of the week, 5 days a week. There was Andy Pandy and... the Wooden Tops,
oh, yes,
and the Flower Pot Men,
yes,
and another one, Ragtag and Bobtail, I think was called, and the 5th one was called Picture Book, and it had a rather pretty young woman in it presenting, and that, in a way, is what set me off. In contrast, I think a lot of what you do when you initiate things is to react against what's been there before.
Yeah, well, you made a really interesting observation about what was the problem with some children's television at the time, which was people spoke to the audience like they were all in a theatre together, rather than speaking to an individual child. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, because there was a joke that men used to wear dinner jacket in order to watch television in case the presenter might see them. It's ridiculous now to think of that, but it was a fact. And in the same way, I did realise that as I watched television, I had a feeling that the presenter was talking to me directly. There weren't people round me. And that was why I really urged the presenters to talk as if to one person. It's very focused. What
was your assessment of what BBC Children's TV was like, and perhaps what you wanted to do differently?
Well, the obvious thing about it was that it was all on film, and they kept regurgitating the same films over and over. And in its day, it had been very innovative. It was wonderful, and still people enjoy Andy Pandy and the Flower Pot Men because there was a lot of imagination in that. It was a result of I think she was already the head of children's programmes before Owen Reid. She was called Frida Lindstrom, and Frida made these stories, and they were in their time an innovation. But after years of regurgitating them, it felt very stultified, and Owen Reid rightly thought there should be new thinking. So I was asked to write a report, which I dutifully did, and I was pretty outspoken, particularly about the picture book girl, who seemed to me to represent really everything that I didn't like about children's work, which was that she was pretty but an nonentity as far as I could see, and she was talked down. She had what someone once called the kindergarten smile.
Here I am again with the picture book. Are you ready to look at it? Let's open it and see what's inside, shall we?
Which is a sort of, yes, and let's talk about the puppy dog, that sort of thing. And I hated it, you know. So I thought, well, first of all, most of those children's programmes, including Blue Peter at that time as well, had 2 presenters at the most. Whereas I was married to a man who worked in the current affairs department in the BBC.
This is Tony,
and I was
Tony
used
Whitby.
to teams of wonderful, varied people talking on an adult programme. And I thought, well, why shouldn't we have it on a children's programme? And it gives you much, much more leverage about interesting people and mixed collection of people who interchanged. There were 2 a day, but they interchanged over the weeks.
Here's a house. Here's a door.
So tell us a bit, how did the commission come to launch Play School? Because this is 1964, BBC Two is this new station that's being set up. What was the brief and how did you come to create it?
Michael Peacock was the controller of BBC Two at that time. He went on to BBC One, but he was BBC Two and it was new and he wanted new programming. And luckily for me, he had 2 small boys himself at that time. He later got a girl. And so he was very aware of the dearth of nursery schools at that time in England and thought a daily programme live for young children still at home before going to school would be a very good opportunity. So there was a board and I was lucky enough to get the job.
You devised the show, didn't you?
They gave me a complete brief. I can't believe it now when you look back, you know. Nobody told me what to do.
So it was a complete blank slate. They said, do what you like.
Yes.
And even the title, who came up with the title? Was that the one thing they came up with?
I think I was given the title, actually. Right. I can't remember who gave it. Probably Michael Peacock, Play School. Yes.
It's interesting that it has the word school in it, which does imply education, isn't it?
Yes, because it was very much a Reithian concept of to educate through entertainment. And I had the wit, I think, to ask various knowledgeable people. So I went to the education department of the London County Council, and there was a formidable woman there in charge of education who said to me, you should be talking to a woman called Nancy Quayle. And she was a funny little old-fashioned person who'd been a sort of nanny, I think, and a teacher, infant teacher. And she became the sort of Bible for everybody.
So a kind of consultant, as an educational specialist.
She was a permanent consultant. She outlived me on Play School. She became regarded with awe, and the reality was that her contribution was interesting, but not altogether wonderful. It was limited.
Well, talk us through what the show was as a format, because it ran for so many years and the format, essentially, the formula was pretty unchanged. There was a mix of songs.
Brian O'Lynn was an Irishman born, his shoes all worn out and his stockings were torn.
There was the dolls.
Teddy's got a new waistcoat. Do you like it? It's got spots on it, like the 5 spotted cows in the poem. Lots and lots of spots.
There was that sense of going through a window to see a film about the real world.
I've chosen that magic window today because on Fridays, you know, we always go and visit a school and see what other children are doing. You coming? Come on then, through this window.
A real mix of tone and pace.
I realised, because I actually wrote the first, I think, 6 weeks of scripts, and I realised that, you know, you'd tear your hair out writing. Even if you had a team of writers, you needed what I think a lot of people who've had a successful format, you needed a framework in which people could be innovative. And so over the 5 days that Play School ran, Monday to Friday, I thought if one had a different focus each day, So there was dressing up day, pets day, imagination day, that kind of thing.
Our calendar says that it's Wednesday. Wednesday, the 21st of April.
And it was a real sense of it unfolding in real time because they did the calendar every day, didn't they? So you knew where you were.
Yes, because there were certain, apart from the changes of focus each day, there were certain landmarks which were appearing every day. And one was a clock.
This is our clock with a special chime.
Which vaguely taught the time, yes. But was interesting in other ways. And another was the chair in which different people would tell a story every week.
And this is our chair for story time.
And there was the Pets Corner.
That should have been 3 blind mice, shouldn't it? But we've only got 2 white mice, Henry and Henrietta.
Which only really was focused on Pets Day, but nevertheless the pets were there and were sometimes referred to, that kind of thing. A group of recognisable dolls. One developed the thing as we went along.
Did you have a sense of what kind of people you needed to present it? Because it seems a much more modern style of presentation than what had just come before. So were you aware of that, and how did you identify who were going to be right?
I had a thought that instead of so-called children's presenters who never did anything else but children's programmes, there was the whole adult world of talent to draw on. One of the criteria was people you'd like to have at home over a meal, who were interesting in themselves, who might have other interests rather than just be the play school presenter, and especially if they had the chemistry of changing with different presenters, it would spark different reactions and different performances.
Yeah. Well, it was really striking as well how diverse the presenting roster was on that programme and on all your programmes. So Paul Dankwer.
I found this wig and these gloves on the pegs. And there are some for Virginia too.
The actor who'd been in films like A Taste of Honey, I think. There he was as one of the presenters, a black man presenting a children's programme in the early 60s. And you had an Italian presenter as well, Marla Landi.
Along the river, there are a number of locks like this, with a cottage and a garden on them.
Tell us a bit about how you found these people and indeed what reaction you got both within the BBC and from viewers.
The reaction, even in that first programme, was a wonderful note from Michael Peacock, who'd been watching, saying, well done. That was an accolade. Nobody really commented. They took it for granted what was there.
Going back to what Samira was saying about the diversity, did you actively look for that? Or did you just think this was going to make the show have more interest for young children? Gives it more kind of texture? Or were you thinking, I do want to be more representative of the country?
It's a big mixture. I had very much admired Marla Landi, who was doing a programme about Italian for the BBC, about learning Italian or something. And I thought it would be a very good thing to show presenters who had perhaps an accent. And she had a quite strong accent, but she was very charming. And then I remember thinking I would see somebody I knew was acting at the Lyric Theatre. And I went there to look at her, and there were 2 people. One was the woman on one side and one was Rick Jones on the other side.
The Canadian actor who
he was singing
Bobs.
songs, and he had us all as audience in the palm of his hand. So I went round the back afterwards and said, would you consider? And he said yes.
Please be so kind. It won't take very long.
And that was Rick, which made me think, again, it was the time when we were becoming racially very conscious. And I thought it was awful that there wasn't all the faces were white. There was Marla, who was Italian. There was Rick, who was a Canadian. But the preponderance were straight English. So then we did make interviews, and Paul Dankwa, who was charming, did a very good interview audition, but he never really lived up to it. He was an intellectual, I think, and I don't think he quite got the right vibe towards a child somehow. People like Eric Thompson, who was somebody I'd worked with in the Blue Peter days, Eric Thompson, who was absolutely marvellous.
Curly locks, wilt thou be mine? Thou shalt not wash dishes, nor yet feed the swine.
He later did the voiceover for The Magic Roundabout. A director called Ron Eyre said, "You know Eric, but you should interview his wife," and that was Philida Law.
Hello. We told you we'd be having a party today, didn't we? It's an Easter party, but it's also a birthday party for Play School, because Play School is 1 year old today.
One thing that kind of puzzles me now in retrospect about Play School is why it wasn't just cast with a regular team. Did you always think why did you want to always be changing the presenters? It's quite unusual. There's not many shows like that.
I was so conscious of the domination of one face for children or even for adults. And whereas you do get a bonus from somebody that's very well known, one's only got to think of the cookery programme with Prue Leith,
yes.
And you long to see her every week if you are a watcher. But it seemed to me that it was dangerous, because for small children, if anything happened to that presenter, it would be a very big blow.
Interesting.
And therefore, if you've got a choice and you begin to know that the world is full of different people, that is really a big advantage.
There's a great what if about Play School, which is Verity Lambert, who had been the launch producer of Doctor Who. You said that she approached you about getting work on Play School. What happened?
Verity, I didn't know at all, but she was a very successful producer. When new authorities came in, she lost her job, and that's when she came and asked whether she could work on Play School.
We were talking about your eye for new talent. You famously discovered Brian Kent, didn't you? How did that happen, and what did he do in his audition?
It's a story that's been told over and over again, but it is true. There were auditions for Play School, as well as people that I might personally appoint from personal knowledge. And at his audition, I think I was up in the gallery, and he was on in the studio.
So we chatted a bit, and she asked me if I was good with children, and I said no, and all those kind of things.
And there was this bright young man down there, and I wondered what to do, and I said to him,
"Get in that box." I said, "Pardon?" She said, "Get in that cardboard box and row out to sea."
And without batting an eyelid, he got into the box. I think he also found a mop, which he used as a mast, and he went on a wonderful journey.
Well, it was a lovely day. Once I got out there, it was beautiful. Nobody about. There were a few little clouds scudding.
And he found, I think, a Wellington boot full of custard, or anyway, his imagination ran riot.
And, which I never mentioned at the time, but there was this mermaid I met. She was on a little rock, anyway.
And there was no question that he would be and became one of the leading Play School presenters, and much beyond that later.
So tell us about Jackanory, because this programme is considered such a landmark. And again, it's such a modern show, the idea of storytelling direct, particularly at a time when there's a huge new crisis about young children and reading. Where did the idea come from, and how did you go about creating that show?
When Michael Peacock was controller of Channel 1, he decided, as a result of the success of Play School, to ask me to do another daily programme for slightly older children at tea time. And again, I was left entirely free to do what I wanted. But by then, there was this slightly expanded Play School team working together. And we put our heads together. And because of my own background, which had a continental association, I'd been brought up with books from Finland and books from Russia and books from France and picture books, this is. And I realised there was this huge treasure house of stories which were so much better than the sort of stories that were being written by puppet makers for their own puppets.
Yes.
And it seemed to me that to dip into this worldwide treasury was the obvious thing. And then the next thought was that who would tell these stories? And obviously, again, change and variety was a compulsive thought because there were all these wonderful people out there.
The title of the show, Jackanory, where did that come from?
Well, two of the team went on holiday together and we were all wondering what to call this story programme. And they rang me up from their holiday and said, "What about Jackanory?" And if you look it up in a nursery rhyme source, the Opies are a good source, it gives the whole rhyme, which is, "I'll tell you a story of Jackanory, and now my story's begun. I'll tell you another of Jack and his brother, and now my story's done." And it is a very old rhyme, and it was just perfect, and I said, done.
Hello. Every day this week, I'm going to tell you a different story. And these come into today's story. Do you know what it is? Well, it's a plant called a bulrush. There's an old joke. Why did the cow slip? Because he saw the bulrush.
Can I ask you about Lee Montague? He was the first. Where did he come from?
I just admired his acting on something, and I thought he would be... I'd never met him, but he was a charming man, and he did really do a very good job first off to create the atmosphere. I'd learnt things from play school, and one was what my husband used to call familiar originality, which was that you would have something like the chair that they sat on, a bench, and it was a white bench, and it was the same bench that different people sat on each week. And I had actually watched Compton Mackenzie, who was a roue.
I really should apologise, John, for being in bed. The point is that I'm writing my autobiography at the moment. I have to do a great deal of reading for it in the past, a very small print, my great-grandfather's autobiography. And I can only read in bed.
The novelist, the Edwardian novelist.
He wrote Whiskey Galore, which was made into a film, and he was an Edwardian character, and by then an older man, and he lived in Edinburgh. But I'd seen him do the most wonderful programme for adults called The Glory That Was Grease, and he was just talking to camera with no props, as far as I remember. And so I went up to Edinburgh and sat beside his four-poster bed and invited him to be one of the first Jackanory storytellers. And he thought about it a lot. And by the time I left, his housekeeper showed me out. She married him, actually. She was his wife. He said he'd do it. So he came down to London some months later to record it. And I remember we had to have an air cushion because he needed to sit comfortably. And he told the story of Medusa. And I still can remember him sitting there absolutely just to camera and putting his hands through his hair to say it was like snakes. And the shiver that went down our spines watching him. He was compulsive. He was wonderful.
I love that from the very get-go you established the idea of telling children to stories as something that serious actors took seriously. So there was an authority, and presumably people then queued up, as they still do, to go on that format.
It became very, very fashionable for actors. It was a good break for... They were on their own. You just had a huge eavesdropping audience for children at tea time. So they became the dominant person of that programme, and it became absolutely a queue of people wanting to do it. Another of the premises of Jackanory was that the story would have to match the storyteller.
Is this a new departure, reading stories for children on television?
Yes, it's the first time I've done it at all.
So there was a wonderful old actress called Margaret Rutherford.
And I think television is always rather terrifying.
And it did seem to me that she would be a very good match for the Beatrix Potter stories. I had to go to Gerrard's Cross to have tea with her and her little husband called Mr. Stringer, who was also an actor, but was really her kind of servant, really. Anyway, he brought the tea in. But I went with one of my colleagues, who was a very ebullient young man who looked a bit like Henry VIII. And we went there for tea together, and she took a fancy to him. She disregarded me. She treated me as if I wasn't there. She entirely talked to this young man, and he wooed her. I mean, she said she'd do it. I'm sure I had nothing to do with it. But that was Sandy McCourt, he was called.
Could everyone do it, or did some struggle? And was it autocue, or would they have to learn?
I was very keen on reality, but of course we were, I think from the word go, recording several at the same time. So it was a very economical business. And so because each week differed, or should have differed, in its approach to the presentation. So one week you might have, with Beatrix Potter stories, a different story each day. But then there might be a novel in which it was serialized as a 5-part story. And another day they might use graphics to cover a story which had no original pictures in it. And so a graphics unit grew in the Jackanory Play School unit. I think there were about 4 to 6 very, very good artists working, and they became, unfortunately, a sort of sausage factory because it was so much easier to provide pictures rather than to rely on somebody being able to talk straight to camera without, even with autocue, looking natural.
Well, just at that moment, Mortimer, whose sight was very keen, noticed something in the far distance and let out a croak. "What is it, Mortimer?" said Arabelle. "Can you see a dinosaur?" "Nevermore!" And he began to struggle in Arabelle's arms and finally jumped down into the road and flapped off sideways across the blackish-brown spongy peat.
I know years later I saw Bernard Cribbins talking at the BFI, and he particularly enjoyed reading the Arabelle's Raven stories on Jackanory, and he remembered being quite shocked to find a lot of the beautiful artwork just dumped in a skip after recordings. Were you aware of what happened to a lot of the artwork?
No, I thought it was kept. I had no idea.
He was shocked. He said he would retrieve pieces when he could.
Yeah, similarly, I know somebody who worked in BBC Graphics, and he said they used to just be in the hallway, and so people would just pick something at a Quentin Blake up or something and take it home.
Yeah, Quentin Blake drawings.
Yeah,
just discarded.
I'm really shocked to hear that. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Gosh.
No.
Yeah. Can you give us an idea a bit of, because this is near the end of your time with the BBC. Now, my chronology is getting a bit woolly here, because there wasn't a children's department for a while, was there? They did wrap up a proper children's department at some point in the 60s, and it was re-established later. What were the internal politics like? What do you remember about working at Television Centre?
When I was first doing Play School, I worked for the then new head of children's programmes called Doreen Stevens, who became very important to me because she was such a wonderful enabler and supporter, and in her own right, a great achiever. And she only took on being head of children's if the name could be changed to family programmes. Right. So she became head of family programmes. But when we both went to London Weekend Television, And when Monica Sims came in, I think it reverted to being head of children's after Doreen.
When you and Doreen Stevens left to go to LWT, I was shocked to realise that a Blue Peter annual had a story with a villain in it who was called Whitby Stevens, who was obviously a reference to the two of you. That sounded
yes,
like
there was a lot
poisonous.
of backbiting. The doors closed very firmly on us both, actually, at the BBC children's department, and it was a very hard time. However, one revives.
Before you left to go to LWT, there's another landmark show that is associated with your time at the BBC, which is The Magic Roundabout. Which was a French show, wasn't it? Tell us about how you came to pair that show with Eric Thompson and create such a British classic.
The reason Magic Roundabout came to life was entirely due to Doreen, who used to be sent programmes to consider for her output, and one of them was The Magic Roundabout, and it came in the form of many, many little films. And Doreen realised, being a very good scheduler, that if she broke it up into 5-minuters and showed it just before the news, I think at 6 o'clock, it would gain an enormous eavesdropping audience, which it did.
Yeah, that's a great start when you think about it, just before the news. It's hilarious.
Yes, she was very clever. She was very influential as well to persuade the schedulers to do this. But she did, because it was original. There was no slot like that before. And she asked me, because we had such a good working relationship, she asked me who I thought might do a good job as narrator. In the French version, there were lots of voices.
J'ai pas fait pour être avalé en gargarisme. Tu as mal à la gorge? Non, pas exactement, n'est-ce pas? C'est pour protéger ma voix.
But in the English one, it needed one voice, really.
Hello, Dougal, said Florence.
And I was lucky enough to know Eric Thompson pretty well, and his wife, from play school days. And he did a wonderful job. He couldn't speak French, but he ordered an editing bench for home and worked through the pictures in order to achieve voices that would match the images.
And he wrote the scripts as well, then?
And he wrote the scripts.
Can I ask them, why did you leave the BBC? And when you went to London Weekend Television, it was just getting going, wasn't it?
David Frost, who was a big character in the media world, had joined up with Michael Peacock to set up a new franchise, London Weekend Television. And of course they had to find people to run it. And Michael Peacock, knowing me and knowing Doreen, asked us both. I have a feeling, Doreen said, she'd go if I could come with her, because we'd so much enjoyed working together successfully. And so it was very cloak and dagger. I was sworn to secrecy, and I went out to a meal not knowing what to expect with Michael at some restaurant, and he told me that under great secrecy they were planning this. And of course, when I knew who else was going to come, like Humphrey Burton and Frank Muir, people who were my heroes at the BBC, and Doreen, all I could think was to say yes, it was new horizons. But there was another very strong reason, and it wasn't money, which malicious people did say was the motive. I'd always very, very much wanted to make drama. And in the BBC Children's Department, even when it was family programmes, there had been a ruling that drama was now only in adult drama, no children's drama. And it was a terribly frustrating situation for me anyway. And so one of the things I was offered at London Weekend was big funds to make big films.
The start of London Weekend Television was quite torrid in a way, wasn't it? Because I think they had quite high-minded ideas of the sort of programme they were going to make, really high-quality programmes, which didn't do that well, did they? They sort of. What are your memories of those first kind of months?
I think Michael Peacock was to bring in quality into ITV, which in itself as a concept must have raised a lot of antagonism from other very successful ITV...
Yes, the rest of the network.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think he started, therefore, with a disadvantage, and it built up. The thing at ground level that was very difficult at the beginning, because we were the original heads of department. I was head of children's under Doreen, who was also head of religion and education, I think. There were a lot of redundancies after the collapse of the previous networks that had been lost in the new franchises. And we had to take on a lot of of these redundancies. Right. And many of them were quite unsuited to work in, for example, children's programmes. And that was quite a difficult thing. And they resented being under new management. So that was a bit difficult. And it was fascinating moving from the sheltered life I'd enjoyed at the BBC always to a place where I didn't even know where the studios were. They were at Wembley.
I mean, it is interesting looking at the range of really beautiful quality dramas that you oversaw and commissioned at LWT. So The Growing Summer.
Why not schools? Got seven aunties and uncles.
Dad's mum and dad were killed in the war.
I wish I had been alive in the war. Daddy said he liked staying with Aunt Dimphna. He said he liked her. Yes, well, he would. He's a bit dotty himself. Who else would go looking for germs? Ugh.
Scientists do that.
It'll be all right. You see. It's by the sea, and it's a big house.
Growing Summer wasn't as successful, or well-known, rather, as Ballyshoes, which Noel Stretfield wrote. But I went to see her and meet her to talk about the possibility, and she must have said, I'd like The Growing Summer to be considered. And it's a lovely story about town children, rather spoilt and rather privileged, being sent to Ireland to live under the auspices of a very eccentric old aunt. And I was lucky enough to get Wendy Hiller, who was a very successful, famous actress, to play the part of this eccentric aunt.
I want to go home.
Want home? Want mummy? What next?
It had to be scripted. And although I did love scripting, I had the wit to ask, again, Eric Thompson of Magic Roundabout fame to write the script. And I also was lucky enough to persuade Gareth Davis, who was a very well-known, he did all the Potter plays, or many of the Potter plays for the BBC, and he directed it. And we all went off to Ireland and filmed it. I should say we found a house which belonged to friends of Noel Stretfield, and I think I could say this, they were two old ladies, and we were allowed the run of the house. And it was a very old, very strange house. And in the basement, the cellar was chock-a-block with empty gin bottles.
And then the kind of running drama series, Catweazle. Which, although comic and warm-hearted, I remember being quite frightened by it.
Save me, you spirits, bear me away, let me fly, salme, dalme, adone.
And this was a script for another discovery of yours, in a way, Richard Carpenter, who went on to create landmarks such as Robin of Sherwood. I mean, this was his first big commission, wasn't it?
He was a young actor, not all that successful, but he clearly had script potential. And him. I didn't know who he was. But it had the idea of a series he wanted to make about an old wizard from the past, from Anglo-Saxon days, coming into the present and facing the present world. But the thing that caught my attention so much on his piece of paper was that he said, for example, I'd like an electric bulb in Catweazle's eyes to be the sun in a bottle.
It's only electricity.
Oh, Master Magician, let me serve thee.
What?
Tell me the secrets of this new magic.
Magic?
Teach me thy electricity, that I may do it.
Do what?
Put the sun in a bottle.
And it was such a vivid idea that I said yes, and we then worked together very happily on the first series.
What about the casting of that? Geoffrey Belden is inspired. How did you come across him?
Richard Carpenter said, I've really written this about an actor I like very, very much, called Geoffrey Belden. I hope he will be cast. And of course, with that recommendation and his background, because Geoffrey had already been a successful actor, it became a yes, definitely. And it was also interesting, the title of Catweazle. That was, Richard told me, he'd been driving with his wife one summer evening, and they stopped by chance outside a gate which had a notice on it saying Catweazle. And that's what made him choose that name.
Oh, it was just a perfect creation. And watching it now as an adult, I appreciate all the more just how much depth and sophistication there was to a series that was aimed at children.
Well, in those days, Sunday afternoon was both on the BBC and on ITV, was often a family viewing programme,
yes.
And that's why it fitted into that slot.
Joy, you're such a pioneer. You were a woman running children's departments in the 1960s and 70s when, women were, and we still didn't have, an Equal Pay Act, and sex discrimination was rife. And I wonder, looking back, you obviously were successful, but did you face discrimination, do you think? How were you treated in some of the places you worked?
Well, for example, in Catweazle, there was a sort of male trio between the director, the scriptwriter Richard, and the actor Geoffrey Belden. Geoffrey and Richard couldn't have been nicer to work with, but Quentin Lawrence, the director, was a chauvinist, I think. And somehow or other, although I used to go to locations and although they were never outwardly rude to me, they excluded me. They went off doing things together, having meals together, and I was excluded. But the really bad thing was that at that time, I didn't realise that the title executive producer can really mean very little. And so I was credited as executive producer, and there was no mention of my contribution in the other areas at all.
You left London Weekend Television in 1970, which I understand was really in protest over the dismissal of managing director Michael Peacock.
Totally, because of that. Those of us who had been invited by him to go from the BBC to London Weekend were really quite outraged that he should have been what we thought was a scapegoat. There was probably some reason for him being too elitist for that background, that need for commercial success. But anyway, we decided that we would resign in protest if he was kicked out, and we did, and made great friends with each other as a result.
Well, you founded Grasshopper Productions, which is still very much in production in the sense of it's still very much there. And you made Grasshopper Island, which is a show that people hold with such huge affection. I think you still get a lot of interest in it, and there's a German fan site for it. This was a drama about three boys who run away from home and end up on a beautiful Greek island. And And the three boys are your three sons, is that right?
Yes. I'd been on holiday to Corfu and I watched my three sons playing on the beach, and I wondered how they would manage if my husband and I weren't with them. What would the pecking order be, and so on. And when I got home, I thought I'd do this film. Unfortunately, at that time, the colonels were in charge of Greece and Corfu.
Oh, of course, the military
and
junta.
the Union wouldn't let anyone go and film there. And luckily, as a friend from those London weekend days, Frank Muir said to me, "Why don't you join my family? I have a villa in Corsica, a holiday villa. Come and see if you can film it there."
You know what I find hilarious is actually the premise you've just outlined of Grasshopper Island is essentially the same as Lord of the Flies, and yet you make something that is charming and slightly magical. And the whole drama starts, I think, was it shot in your house, of the three boys running away?
No wonder they decided to run away. Smarty found a trunk in the attic, which they filled with all the things they thought they'd need.
But all the figures of authority, including, I think, the Char Lady, are played by Tim Brooke Taylor. And it's such a charming concept.
Yes.
Did you write this? Where did the story come from?
My head.
Your head.
Yes. It's interesting, at the time, you don't know. In fact, I was writing some of the scripts while we were actually filming. And Doreen, who had appeared before in my life, as you know, came with us. And being a woman of great kindness and no pride at all, she was our cook, our cleaner, our babysitter, and everything. But she was quite strident. She would be the first to laugh about this. And one night, trying to write a script against time for filming in the next morning, her voice was so intrusive, I had to say to her, "Doreen, could you go and live elsewhere?" And she did.
Was it unusual to set up an independent production company back then? It seems very ahead of your time.
It was early independent days. Yes, it was early. It was before time. Well, the story of getting the money together is maybe worth telling.
Please.
At London Weekend, I had a secretary who, as I discovered later, was quite a socialite. And she went out to a dinner party and she met young man who was a financier, and he said to her, "People don't realise, but we're quite up for funding the Mozarts and Beethovens of today." So she said, "I've got a boss who needs money for a new project." And so I met him, and he was delightful, and he got a syndicate together, and they made the money. Can you believe the whole of Grasshopper Island, which was 13 episodes of, they were each 13 minutes at that time. That's a lot of footage. The whole thing, from beginning to end, cost £40,000.
Gosh. Did Grasshopper Productions have an office, an HQ, or was it
My
more?
home.
That's what I
My
would
home,
thought.
my
Yeah,
home, yes.
yeah.
And afterwards, we kept the identity of the boys a big secret because I didn't want them to be caught up in that world. And afterwards, there were just one or two complaining letters, one of which said, "It was lovely, but the boys didn't look like brothers."
Where was its transmission? Where did it go out in the end? Was it on LWT?
We thought that it was clearly a BBC vehicle. But the old terrible attitude of the children's department then said it was too middle class.
Right.
Because the BBC turned it down, to our astonishment, because we had shown the pilot to several producers around the world, and in Canada they were very keen, and so on. It did in fact sell all around the world.
When you talk about the BBC's reaction to it, and we've heard this story about when you left, was there some kind of animosity towards you at the BBC then, or some kind of rancour?
Looking back and talking to friends, I realised that especially the media, does tend to get talented people together who can be very jealous and vindictive. And in my time, I'm sure a lot of the people who were talented and working under me thought they could do much better than me and resented me very much. I think that can only explain, not all of them, of course, many of them remained friends for life, but there were a couple of very vindictive people.
Who were there for a very long time as well, I think, crucially. Stayed on for a very long time at the BBC after you left. So the sense of an institutional grudge, I think, ran deep. I've got to say, there was a big BBC 4 night about the history of children's television. And it was a big documentary. And I remember it got repeated not that long ago. And they repeatedly showed a photograph of you sitting in a TV gallery directing. But not once was Joy Whitby mentioned in that whole programme.
No, I know. It was a continuing animosity from a particular person, and it went on and on.
Did it impede your career, this animosity from the BBC? It seems that independent television, actually, you had a great career, but do you feel it did close doors to you, or were you able to rise above that?
I don't know if I would have enjoyed becoming head of children's at the BBC with all the restrictions that are there now. It's a different world from the world that I grew up in there. So I'm also very aware that if you have a choice in life of going back to Crossroads, would you take the same road? And I think I would, because you learn from adversity as much as you learn from success.
I've always sensed, and I think you've said this to me before, Joy, that you're always a person who looks ahead rather than looking back. And I'd like to talk about what you went on to do then. So when you go independent, you actually take up a job at Yorkshire TV. From, is it 1975? Did you become controller of children's television at Yorkshire?
1975, yes.
Yeah. And this is a really exciting time because, and I know a lot of people talk with great affection still about a show you pioneered there called The Book Tower.
You know there are 4,784 books in this tower. Now, I haven't read all of them, but I've read quite a few. And today, I'm going to tell you about 6 very different ones.
With Tom Baker and later Neil Innes. Tell us about this show.
Well, I realised I couldn't do another Jackanory as such, but I was very keen on books, and I had a lot of book connections, publishers and so on, and I wanted to do a book show. And I therefore persuaded Paul Fox, much against his will, to do something as elitist as the Book Tower. And to compensate for it being elitist, I thought, who would present it? And obviously Tom Baker was at the peak of his success. And so I wrote to him. I didn't know at that time that he was so much in favour of children's education.
But I remember looking at the first episode, in which the first book that he reads an extract from is about a boy caught up in a plane hijacking.
Every year, hundreds of thousands of people travel around the world by aeroplane quite safely. But some are not so lucky. They get hijacked, forced by gunmen to land, to stay in the aeroplane, whatever the conditions, waiting, while other people decide whether they live or die. What would you do if it happened to you?
It felt very contemporary, the fiction you were choosing. I'm really interested in how you chose the books and how you aimed the programme, who you aimed it at.
Well, the programmes went out at tea time, and therefore that, in a sense, dictates what sort of audience you expect at that time. And it was a children's department, so therefore I was aiming really at all kinds of children coming back from school, some in their teens and others really at the beginning. So the choice of books had to be very varied for all sorts of good reasons. You want variety of presentation and variety of source and so on. I was lucky enough to have as a colleague Anne Wood, who later made Teletubbies when she left. And for 10 years we worked very, very happily together, creating the Book Tower and supervising the Book Tower. And she was a great source of knowledge about books. I mean, I had done Jackanory, and I knew about the book world without Anne Wood, but Anne Wood's knowledge of books and my contribution made it a very successful team.
Can I ask about working with Tom Baker? Because he's a terrific talent. You mentioned in passing that he had a passion for education for children as well, but he could also be a larger-than-life, potentially tricky character. How was he to work with?
When I wrote to him, we agreed to meet for lunch to discuss whether he would come. And I was sitting in the restaurant when the waiter arrived with a message from Tom Baker saying he was very sorry he'd be late. So I thought I'd be waiting for an hour or something. 3 minutes later, he turned up larger than life. And by the end of lunch, he'd agreed to do it. I don't think I ever had a crossword with him, nor did the rest of the team. But he could be quite, as I discovered later, quite annoyed when members of the crew might talk through rehearsals, and he would then call them up sharply, quite rightly. Mm-hmm. He had every reason to do so. And he was required to do some very strange things. I mean, I remember we did a story about the town mouse and the country mouse.
I remember this.
And we had as a feature of the book tower a very large teapot. And part of the magic intended in the book tower in order to counteract the elitism was that Tom, or whoever the presenter was, would use this teapot in any way other than pouring tea. And so he would put his hand in the teapot. Of course, he knew what was inside, but he pretended he didn't. And he might pull out, if it was Christmas time, he might pull out a mince pie, or on one occasion he pulled out 2 little mice.
You thought there was any tea in this pot, didn't you? Well, you're wrong.
2 little live white mice.
Hello, mice.
And of course today we wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Oh gosh.
Unhygienic.
I know, I was thinking that watching it back. It's such a different time.
The theme music for the Book Tower, it's such an inspired choice. It's very un-children's television. It used to really frighten me when I watched it as a kid, but in a good way. Can you tell me about that, how you came to choose that piece of Lloyd Webber music?
I'm pretty sure it would have been recommended by the head of music at Yorkshire Television, who was very helpful.
It's a great gothic edge to it.
The whole programme itself has a slight gothic tone to it. Do you think that kind of slight layer of scariness is good in children? Because I got that from Catweazle as well.
Yes.
He's not a very soft character. Do you think children have always responded to that slight edginess?
All children's literature, going right back, has, like the Grimm's fairy tales, has got an element of danger in it and fright in it. And although I wouldn't go out to want to scare any children, I think if they're in a safe environment, it probably is part of the learning curve of life.
Mm. And looking at the programmes you were making through the 1980s, there's a couple of things that stand out. And one is A Pattern of Roses, the TV drama that you made, in which you cast a then unknown Helena Bonham Carter.
Come for a walk, Tom.
I can't.
Why not? No one will know. Be back before they notice. Oh, Tom, it's much too nice to work.
Oh, come on then, girl.
Come on. Race you.
Tell us about that drama, and particularly the story of casting her, because you chose her over an equally unknown Hugh Grant, didn't you?
Yes. I had a very good director called Lawrence Gordon Clark, who decided to audition boys for the story. There were 2 main boys and 2 main girls.
It's a time travel story. There's a present day young boy and he goes back in time, and there's a Victorian element.
Exactly, and there were echoes from the past. And so a group of boys were auditioned from Westminster School, and one came to this house, my house, and his girlfriend came with him from the school, 17-year-old Helena Bonham Carter, and she had a mass of wonderful hair. and she was very beautiful. And I took one look at her and I realised that she'd be the perfect girl for one of the past girl who was a bit of a
minx, I would say.
Minx, yes, yeah. And in fact, fatal. And so afterwards, we didn't have the boy, but we went and wooed her father, who was in a wheelchair. And she was there, demure in her little frock and wheeling him round and begging him to let her be in it because, it was acting. I think she had done one advertisement, but she wasn't really in the acting world. And
she remembers it with great affection, Joy, and she told me to tell you how much she enjoyed working on that.
Well, she was so charming. And
but Hugh Grant had auditioned for the part of the modern boy, hadn't he?
Well, that was the thing, that Lawrence found Hugh Grant, who was unknown, happened to have been a school friend of my middle son. And therefore, we knew Hugh from the school, and he wanted to be an actor. He didn't have, at that time, a union card. It was very much a catch-22 because if you didn't have a card, you couldn't work, and the only way of getting a card was working. And so I remember going to a terrible, formidable meeting of union officials. There were a long table full of them, and I had to choose between Helena and Hugh because I could only have one of them.
Without a card.
And I chose Helena. But I think if I'd have had both of them, I would have been very, very successful.
Oh, fully comprehensive to thee we give our thanks.
I'd really like to ask you about Behind the Bike Sheds from the mid-80s, which is a very kind of raucous school set comedy show.
Behind the bike sheds, behind the bike sheds, there's something great about the bike shed, give and take.
And my memory of it is it was actually quite edgy. What are your memories of that?
I've got rather bad memories of the bike shed because, in my innocence, I didn't really realise that the title itself is a bit iffy.
Yeah.
I think I've got a note that I had to pass everything in front of Paul Fox, my boss, and I remember him being a bit surprised at the title, but he passed it, and I had it. I had a group of people working for me at Yorkshire, and some of them were wanting to be a bit more abrasive. I also think they wanted to kind of have a go at Grange Hill.
Yeah.
And do something a bit rougher than Grange Hill. Although I never watched Grange Hill, and I'm sure it had its very rough moments. So I did delegate it much more. We did try to have a team of young actors and actresses, some of whom became very well known, but I never really related much to that.
And the other thing that really fascinated me, I was too old for it when it was on, but from the mid-80s was a programme called The Giddy Game Show.
Here's Giddy. Now we can play the Giddy Game Show. Are you ready out there?
Gorilla's ready.
Giddy's ready.
Gus is ready.
Which was animated, but it had a kind of an interactive element whereby viewers were invited to guess what was going to happen next or what's the right answer.
Game 4 is your alphabet game, Gorilla. And today's letter is R.
Big R and little r.
All these pictures begin with R. Now, can you find the word in the picture for something beginning with R that you put on the floor?
There was a man called Peter Schreck, I think. He was American, and he was very much a pioneer of interactive work. And I don't know why he came to see me, and I took it on, and we created a show. I think it was a total failure because it was before its time. Yeah. we were trying to interest the management of Yorkshire Television to back it, because Peter Schreck was really a commercial man and wanted to develop this interactive element, which I don't think ever materialised, and it became just a show. And yes, we devised lots of games and puzzles, but as I say, it didn't really take off. I think largely because it didn't have much backing from the management.
You continue to make really important and much loved programmes throughout the 1980s, and a lot of them struck me are animations. The films like The Mousehole Cat.
All day they fished in a seething sea. The waves were so high and the clouds so low that they soon lost sight of the shore. And all the time, the great storm cat played with the little boat, striking it, but never quite sinking it. And whenever his claws grew too sharp, Mouser would sing to him to soften the edge of his anger.
Mouse and Mole, this series, which the last episode of which actually was only broadcast in 2013, with the voices of Imelda Staunton, Richard Briers and Alan Bennett.
I don't know why, Mouse, but I have a feeling that something exciting is going to happen today.
Then it won't.
How's that?
Things don't happen when you expect them.
Mouse and Mole was the last of a long line of animations that I had been working on, partly because financially they were easier to raise money for than drama, which was out of my level, without an immense amount of trawling for money. And also, I knew a very, very good animator called Alison de Vere, who was one of the best of her kind, internationally recognised. And she was a delightful, very talented woman. And having worked with her as much as possible through these different animations, we ended up doing Mouse and Mole, which was a series of little books about these two characters, and lent itself very well to 5-minuters. There came the question of casting, and the obvious cast for Mouse, who was kindly and officious and ordinary, was the wonderful Richard Briers, long since dead now, but such a very successful actor. And so, at the time, Stephen Fry was another very likely Mole, because Mole was quite different from Mouse. Mole was hysterical and over the top. And Stephen Fry seemed to be just the right person and agreed to do it. And then it may be remembered that he had a bad patch and he left a play.
That's right, the Simon
and
Gray
got
play.
lost in the continent.
Cellmates.
And the first I heard of it was about a week before we were due to record Mouse and Mole. And his agent rang me to say he couldn't say why, but Stephen, alas, would not be available. And it happened that I knew Alan Bennett's agent from the past, and she, who was very formidable, asked Alan, and Alan said he'd do it. I didn't know Alan at all, but he'd do it on one condition. If Stephen Fry returned, he'd give him the first choice.
Wow.
Which was very generous
Very
and
generous.
elegant and typical of Alan Bennett. But they did turn out to be the most wonderful couple together.
Absolutely. I've got to ask how you, as a woman who's made her career in children's broadcasting from quite early on in television and seen it right through into the 2010s, how you assess the state of it. There's a lot of anxiety now about the fact that children's programming has disappeared from the shared space. It's, there is a dedicated channel, but most broadcasters in the UK have stopped making children's TV, and children increasingly are watching stuff on YouTube, and there's big questions about its quality. You've always been driven by the importance of treating children as important viewers in their own right. What's your sense of the state of their offering for them now?
It's difficult when you're 95 to really watch what's going on. And my family laugh at me because I'm addicted to a South Korean drama.
Well, you see, I love that you watch new output. You're always watching new dramas and things.
Well, it's a sort of escapism, and I watch that on Netflix. So I don't truly watch very much on television, on the terrestrial channels. And I've long since, I think partly because of the disappointment with the relationship with the BBC over the years, I stopped watching children's programmes when I stopped making them, accepting that I still work in the children's area by writing picture books and illustrating picture books, my own, and therefore, you know, I'm not really authoritative at all about what's going on, excepting I'm very sad at watching children so addicted to their devices.
I've spoken to people over the years who worked in children's television, and their aspiration was always to work in grown-up television. And some people rued the fact that they couldn't ever successfully. I get the impression that was never a particular issue for you.
I think people are very divided between those who see it as a stepping stone to better things and those who are really committed to doing an area of programming which happens to be children's.
There are a lot of people who will be listening to this who grew up listening to or watching your programmes, and you know, because many of them contact you and run fan sites and so on. How do you feel about the fact that you've raised multiple generations of children who in many cases, like myself, have shown your programmes to our own children?
The strange thing is that I don't think I've ever... I like informed recognition, but I've never really had very much recognition.
Well, I'm really glad that we had a chance to go through the Square Window with you, Joy, and celebrate your fantastic contribution to television.
Thank you.
Before we go, we should say that Joy's Grasshopper Productions is still very much a going concern, and it's well worth looking at the company's website for clips and whole episodes of Joy's programming. The address is www.grasshopper.co.uk.
In the meantime, if you want to drop us a line about anything from today's episode, you can contact us by writing to email@squarewindow.co.uk or look up Square Window Pod on social media.
But from me, Samira and Joy,
goodbye. Thanks for listening to Through the Square Window.
This was a Square Window production with music by local teenagers.
Our podcast logo was designed by Stuart Manning.
Do subscribe and tell other people about us, and if you're inclined, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts.